The death of the scientist in Poppy Playtime wasn't a simple accident. Everything was meticulously planned from the very beginning. Every single horrific action of the scientist was slowly writing how they were gonna die. So, let's see how the endings of each one of the scientists at Playtime Co. happened. Now, to make everything clearer, let's first discard the most popular idea of all. The scientists were only victims of crazy monsters. Most people agree that the entire attack from the experiments happened only because the experiments got out of control and acted on instinct. But come on guys, let's remember that they're not just simple beasts, they're actually human consciousness. The experiments can feel, think, and remember. And just like they felt affection towards some people, they also felt a lot of hatred and resentment toward others. And it's not like they're stupid either. The experiments can also remember the names and the actions that each scientist did to them. If Playtime Co. had thought about this, they would have wiped their memories or hypnotized them so they would forget everything. Anyway, now I ask you, with all of this in mind, do you still believe this was just a simple incident? Because in reality, all of this was planned, and there was a mastermind behind all of this, the prototype. But relax, because the disturbing part is just beginning. After a long time of being studied, the prototype knew that the only way to truly be free was to join forces with all of the other experiments. With everything he had learned about Playtime Co., he kind of had an idea of what he needed to do to free himself from all the scientists. During one of his many escapes, he took the opportunity to communicate and persuade other experiments to take justice and freedom, even if it had to be in the worst way possible. He was the one who started the idea with the experiments that they had the possibility to take control and stop suffering at the hands of the scientists. And it was also here where cases happened, like the famous death of Theodore, the boy inside Catnap, all as part of a bigger plan. And this plan can be deduced if we analyze each one of the scientists' deaths. Let's begin by looking at the death of Preston. In life, he wasn't the main villain, nor was he the one giving the final orders. But for obvious reasons, he was not that innocent either. He was part of the staff and part of all these horrors. The difference is that, on certain occasions, he showed empathy. He spoke to the experiments as if they were the poor little orphans, and he also felt pity for them. He wasn't the typical bad guy who only treated them like merchandise. In fact, if we remember a bit of his story, he was quite confused when he first started working at Playtime Co.
I still don't understand why they hired me, a biologist at a toy company.
And as he began to understand the true intentions of the factory, he did everything that was in his hands to try to reveal the truth. He even avoided greeting the orphans because he already knew what was waiting for them. And this was probably what condemned him. Despite knowing everything, he never had enough courage to stop all of these abuses. But the truth is that he did not have the guts to report these abuses, and he waited until the very last moment. And how does the prototype treat him? He doesn't massacre him or tear him apart from the very first moment. In fact, it almost seems like the prototype actually liked him enough to give him one of the worst punishments. To experiment on him and turn him into a pile of experimental parts. So, his ending isn't a quick death. The prototype made sure to transform him and make him go through all the cruelty he participated in, even though he had everything he needed to shut Playtime Co. down. He was practically forced to live in his own flesh the horrors of Playtime Co. His greatest punishment wasn't death. It was never being able to escape what he allowed to happen. Miss Gracie Green, the most ruthless brainwashing supervisor. Gracie didn't get her hands dirty with machines. She was the one in charge of preparing the orphans, making them watch memory conditioning tapes, breaking them down, and convincing them to accept their new identity as toys. But the cruelest part was when one of them resisted, she was the one who ordered them to be sent to the bad toy box, where they ended up getting shredded. When the hour of joy began, she tried to hide. She was found and overpowered by the smiling critters and Baba Chops.
Baba, I was just trying to make you all happy. Please, don't hurt me!
We're not gonna hurt you, Miss Gracie. We have something very special planned for you.
But they didn't kill her, because death would have been too easy for someone as cruel as her. The prototype chose something worse. He turned her into a live test subject and transformed her into Lily, forcing her through the same mental conditioning she once imposed on others. Her suffering was brutal. She endured 122 days of conditioning, the longest of anyone, and she resisted harder than anyone else, until she finally broke. She lost her sanity, developed fragmented identities, and became obsessed with her former body. The prototype psychologically tortured her, and in the end, she died at the hands of Player. Then there's Thomas Clarke. Considering that Thomas consciously participated in all the projects at Playtime Co., of course, he deserved the hatred of all of the experiments made from orphans. From the moment he made the decision to become an experiment, he signed his sentence. Did he really think the others would welcome him with a big and warm hug? Brother, you practically ruined their lives. In fact, they didn't even have to plan his death. The experiments made him pay for everything they went through. That's why, after being turned into brawn and being locked up with the others, he ended up being devoured and then torn apart by all of them. Because let's remember that the others knew he wasn't an orphan, but rather a Playtime Co worker. So they took revenge in the most horrific and savage way possible. I can't even imagine what went through the scientists' minds when they decided to put Brawn next to the orphans. Friend, that is extremely dumb. But anyway, Thomas's death was quick but very visceral. They practically made him suffer while he was still alive, until he died in a very explicit way. But what happened to the witch of this story? Jessica Newman wasn't just another face on paper. She, I would dare to say, was one of the most aware people inside the factory. And of course, she knew about everything that was happening. And even so, she decided to be part of the project. Jessica grew up inside Playcare, the same place where she later worked as a scientist, and she was also part of the team that created and reprogrammed living experiments inside Playtime Co. She was one of those who participated in the Bigger Bodies initiative, helping transform real people into living toys, like Catnap and Thomas Clarke, meaning she was torturing these kids. We would all think that someone who lived through and experienced similar things would have a little more empathy, right? Well, in Jessica's case, that wasn't true, friends. So, what did she do? She kept acting like a heartless beast. She didn't even have a bit of empathy. Even the prototype himself acknowledges that she wasn't kind to him at all. At least, not the way Preston was.
You were never very nice.
Were you?
Dr. Newman.
And obviously, all the experiments always kept that in mind. That's why Mommy Longlegs tried to attack her when she attempted to interview her. The worst part of all this is that she always tried to justify herself and blame others. She even tried to convince the prototype that the only one responsible for everything was Leith Pierre. Jessica doesn't receive the same sentence as just any regular employee. She's confronted and destroyed by the prototype himself, face to face. It wasn't just any random experiment that ended her. With this, it becomes very clear that Jessica was deeply involved in the prototype's transformation, especially because of the hatred in the way he speaks to her. And just as the prototype died to take revenge on some, there are others who paid for their actions at the hands of their own colleagues, like what happened with Harley Sawyer. It's important to mention his death, because this man was one of the most ruthless individuals even since childhood. He was responsible for many experiments, including Catnap, Yarnaby, and Dowie. He never showed compassion to anyone, and even tortured the prototype himself to obtain information. His death wasn't quick though. He was punished by his own colleagues and destroyed by Player. So we can say that his punishment was quite fitting, considering he was a horrible person. Because let's be honest, being trapped inside a computer isn't very pleasant, specifically if you didn't even realize when they put you there. That's right, friends. Harley Sawyer was transformed into a computer against his will, because he didn't even realize when it happened. He simply woke up, and he was already there.
Well now, this is a rather interesting turn of events.
Now let's continue with Bruno White and Scientist Number 4. These two worked as a team alongside Harley Sawyer, sharing the same ideas. Bruno was the mastermind almost at Harley's level, but he still ranked second. He led experiments such as Bonzo Bunny, but when Sawyer became an experiment, Bruno took his place. And in fact, he was the one who turned Sawyer into a machine, which was one of his greatest achievements. For that reason, he earned the Doctor's hatred, and he would be massacred during the Hour of Joy by the toys. On the other hand, the so-called Scientist Number 4 followed the orders of those two. He was involved in almost all the experiments created by Dr. Sawyer, like Huggy Wuggy and even the prototype's experiment, since he had quite a lot of knowledge about him. His death occurred during the Hour of Joy, and he was probably killed by Huggy Wuggy himself. In fact, the Hour of Joy was what claimed most of the scientists' deaths. Possibly each experiment took revenge against their assigned scientists, just like with the deaths of Scientist Number 3, Claire Scientist, Carmen McCabe, Scientist Number 1, 2, but there's only one who doesn't appear anywhere. Leith Pierre. Leith Pierre was the main boss of Playtime Co., the arrogant and ruthless mind behind the experiments. He was responsible for the Bigger Bodies Initiative project and was fully aware of everything that was happening inside the factory. He was the one who had the real power. But here's the strangest part. Leith's name never appears in any massacre or killing. We don't see him suffer like the other scientists. Leith is never confronted face to face by any of the experiments, not even by the prototype. Instead, his voice appears in old tapes warning us about plant security, mocking intruders, or justifying failed experiments. His attitude from the very beginning was arrogant, violent, and completely lacking empathy, treating employees and experiments alike as if they were worth nothing. And if we remember, he survived the main disaster of the factory, the Hour of Joy, while others simply died or were directly attacked by the prototype. But we never get to see him face the consequences of his actions. And honestly, I don't believe that the prototype forgot that he exists, knowing that he was the mastermind. From everything we now know, it is very clear that the prototype isn't just killing randomly or because he's hungry. He makes sure to evaluate, remember, and act when he decides is the right moment. And if Leith Pierre hasn't yet received his judgment, then his future appearance isn't just a possibility. We have to see him pay for everything. This is what all the VHS tapes we have had so far are trying to show us. They weren't simple accidents caused by monsters who don't know what they're doing. And now, the biggest question is, what will happen to Player in the end? If he was also an employee, is he next? We don't know. But before we go, I have a reflection for you. Because bro, it's like if you created a homunculus and it ended up killing you. Like, what the fuck? So now you know, friends. That is all for today. Leave in the comments what you think, and I'll see you in the next one.